So if you're logged in, you are ostensibly here because you want to talk about creating a capacity for change. So um, it's always just good to recenter on what the topic is, because Polly and I, even in having a conversation about this conversation, realize there's so many things we could talk about, but we're really going to try hard to stay focused on change, the dynamics of change. We figure that's a big enough topic for us to try to cover for an hour.
Certainly it is.
So here's what's in your near future. There's a Q&A, and it is live right now. So if you can, please continue to say hi in the comments and introduce yourself. Please keep doing that. I know that was the first order of business, but please keep saying like where you're from, and saying hi to us. And also, please put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll have visibility of them. If for some reason we have a second to get to some of those, we'll make sure that we get to them. And there's going to be more resources at the end of this webinar. So if you feel like you missed something, don't worry. There's going to be more resources because you'll also get a full video. If this is the kind of thing that you dig, please check out lift.bigwidesky.com. That's where we will, Big Wide Sky will be providing you with more folks that you can talk to, more folks that you can have conversations with, bringing you some leaders who are seeing change and dealing with it, and figuring out, how to create more capacity for how we deal with the unknown. And that's what's going to be a special treat for you today, because Polly's really expert at doing that. You're here today because you are contending with a lot of change, as we all are. Now, you might be doing that just in your personal life. You might be doing it, as leading an organization. You might care about a community of people a great deal that are dealing with a lot of change. You are working to lead through that uncertainty. You're trying to make sense of it. You're trying to make good decisions, and you're trying to feel good about those decisions you're making. You're trying to usually, work with a group of other humans as you do that. And so what we have for you today are some practices for cultivating a space for increased adaptability. And you're going to hear stories from Polly on how she's been able to do that in the past, and hopefully give you some confidence for what you can do as you lead through the future. So I want to talk a little bit about Polly, and then I'm going to let her talk for almost the entire rest of the hour because she has a lot on her mind and a lot to say. Polly Ruhland is a serial CEO of global organizations. I took some liberty with serial, meaning there's 2 data points, so that makes a line. We're going to just go ahead and say you're a serial CEO of global organizations. And that includes the previous to her work at the United Soybean Board. She was at the beef checkoff and was the CEO there. And then, previous to that, actually worked in association work with the NCBA. And she's created transformations and cultivated new networks, something that Polly has been able to do as she has traversed her career trajectory, is she has been able to create new connections, new networks, to see the world differently than maybe the way that people had been seeing the world, to see a new set of challenges ahead, and to work toward how to build more connections as she's been able to do that. So I think you're going to get to hear about that. She has an academic and professional background in human dynamics and in agriculture. So she has a really unique combination. She has some sociology background, generally understands just human behavior and psychology in a nuanced way, but also has a passion for agriculture. But I want to get, one temptation I had when we were going to put this together, Polly, was I wanted to ask you about your background, where are you from, and that sort of thing. But honestly, and maybe we can even work in some of that into this first question. The first question I really have for you is what are you seeing right now? You have a purview because of what USB does. You are a global, globally connected into all portions of the world. So what is it you're seeing when you look out at the landscape that maybe is different than the headlines that most of us are taking in?
Yeah, so I hesitate to say that I'm an optimist, but I am. I'm kind of a glass half full kind of gal. And so when I look at the challenges that we have right now in the landscape that everybody is dealing with, there's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of anger, and we see that multiplied on the news, on the TV, maybe even when we are able to go out. But for me, I see a lot of silver lining to the situation. Aside from the silver lining of folks being able to stay home more, to connect with their families more, I hear about more people having this kind of work-life balance that they haven't had in a long time, and finding new ways to do work that are more efficient and allow for them to have a greater sense of self-fulfillment. I know in my life, for example, I've been able to maintain a fitness schedule that I have never maintained in the traveling that I've done in the last 10 years. So when I look at organizations and the capacity for change, the corporations that I've talked to, the leaders at many of the agricultural corporations and the other organizations who are my peers, these folks are saying, listen, I'm talking to people who are more well-balanced, who are happier with their work-life balance, even if they are fearful about the future or about the situation in the world today. I'm also talking to leaders who see this as an opportunity to streamline operations, to create efficiencies within their operations. Leaders who were perhaps scared of leaping into technologies like a lot of video conferencing and other types of communications technologies for fear of what it would do to personal relationships in the end, are saying, listen, this is working a lot better than we thought it would. In my own organization, I serve farmers. Farmers, well, extremely technologically advanced on their tractors, for example, in the soybean industry. Their communications technologies, they always have preferred in-person shaking hand kind of meetings. And I can't say that they still don't prefer that, but I think that my farmers, particularly my board of 78, has been very pleasantly surprised by how we can communicate and how well we can engage in this kind of environment. So sometimes I think when we see change that we are not able to control, certainly this is a change that we're not able to control, it is very easy for us to say, you know, the world is falling down around our ears, rather than opening up our minds and saying, how can we make the best of this? And indeed, how can we emerge better than we started? And I always think that that increases our capacity for change when we go in with an open mind and we do our best not to be fearful of what's coming. So I see some good stuff.
Yeah, I saw a meme that traveled around the internet over the last couple of weeks. And I think somebody on our team, actually, Big White Sky, shared it, and it said, what led to your organization's digital transformation? And it said A was CEO, B was CTO, and then C was COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, these sort of crisis moments seem like they create the grounds by which we can examine how could we emerge from this different? How could we emerge from this in a way that we are ready to be more adaptable, that we could change? How have you been able to cultivate that with the United Soybean Board specifically on this? You know, how have you been able to inspire people, I guess, to ask that question while they are feeling, you know, like, you know, anxiety, while there is anxiety and the need for feeling some certainty?
I think there's always a balance in leadership when you're leading through change between being seen as a cheerleader who's not very realistic and being seen as someone who has a vision and the confidence to lead forward. So I think particularly when you have change that you can't control, like COVID, you have to be very dynamic in your thinking, and your vision has to change rapidly. So as long as you can continue to communicate that vision, listen, folks, our mission has not changed. The core work of what we do here at USB and the checkoff, in other words, promotion, education, and research about soybeans to the world, that mission has not changed. And we cannot let ourselves get mired down in the fear of the moment so that our mission goes kind of by the wayside. So I think that constant acceptance of new data into a leadership vision and the ability to turn on a dime and understand how you can incorporate the current conditions and put them to work toward the vision and the mission of the organization is really critical when you're leading through change. People expect leadership and change to set the tone. And I think it's just like when you're parenting, right, Jeremy? I mean, when my son was little, he's 32 now, oh, he's 32 now. But when he was little, I'll never forget when he would fall down and he would look up at me first, like, what's going to happen? Am I hurt? That's the question. Am I hurt? And I always thought to myself, well, if you go up to him and say, oh my God, that must have hurt. It's a terrible thing. And you've fallen down and you're badly injured. Then immediately they start screaming. Leadership can say, hey, this is a bump in the road. This is a travesty. What can we do to help society? What can we do to help you get through it? Farmer stress right now is at an all-time high. But at the same time, we still have a mission. We still have the confidence to achieve that mission. How can we use what's happening in the world to help us move forward more rapidly? So I think there's a fine balance in leadership change between acknowledging people's feelings and making sure that they feel supported and confident, and yet moving forward, maybe even at an accelerated pace if that opportunity presents itself.
So what have been, before this pandemic sort of change arrived at our doorstep, before these kind of incoming inbound changes hit us, you've been a champion for making change happen ahead of any of that. In previous organizations at the Checkoff, you've done so, at the Beef Checkoff and at USB. What are some of the things that are critical, and is that really, is change and understanding how change works, is that a proactive thing? Is that a thing that you feel like you're after? Or do you think that change occurs because you're reacting to what you're seeing in the outside world?
Well, I think it's both. I don't think that's an either or. It's not it's not an either or proposition. And here's what I mean. I have an extreme love for change, and so that means that not only do I have a remarkable resistance or resiliency when change comes, but in fact, I really like it. So I pursue it and I grab hold of it and I make it happen. Not everybody is like that. And I'm not even sure that it's not some sort of mental illness, actually. So I love it. And when I see things that need to be changed, I want that job, right? When I see an organization that is within the norm of organizational development, you got the storming, you got the norming, you got the regular circle of organizational development. When I see an organization that is either at the point of maturity where it's starting to wither, and or a little bit past that point where it's just ready to be reborn, that's the kind of place that I love to enter an organization. And so I think that it takes a certain mindset, a certain thing that you can say, hey, this organization is ready for change. It has the capacity for change, and we can make a huge difference together. That said, an organization like USB and like the Beef Board, we have a large constituency. We are not a corporate organization. We're a nonprofit organization. As I mentioned, I have a very large board, 78-member board. At the Beef Board, I had a 100-member board, all farmers. And so the capacity for change requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of folks involved and engaged in that change. Unless you can get all those folks to really see a common vision and to get excited about that common vision, driving forward too hard will result in failure. And so,
right. So I was about to head there. So this is great because, I mean, what you're saying, of course, resonates and makes sense, but it's really a matter of, especially when you're saying, getting people to understand the contours of a vision. What is the nuance of that? I mean, and how have you been able to do that? And, you joined the Checkoff, the Beef Checkoff was 2011. Am I correct? That you ended up being CEO there. And that was not necessarily the best of times for beef at the time. And what did you see that maybe other people didn't? Like, was there a vision that you had for the role of the Beef Checkoff and what you could do there when the circumstances, by what most people could imagine, were actually, they were certainly negative, right? There weren't a lot of positive sort of visions of the future for beef in 2011.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I'm a remarkable optimist, and I truly believe, because I'm a human dynamics kind of person, that almost every organizational issue is caused by human dynamics. Humans are the core of any organization, whether it goes right or goes wrong. So when I go into an organization like the Beef Checkoff, I see the human interaction challenges first. And certainly at the Beef Checkoff, with a history of distrust between the different elements and the different constituencies that were in that organization, almost anything, and maybe I'm naive, Pollyanna, maybe I'm naive, but I say that almost any challenge can be solved with helping human dynamics and elevating human dynamics. And so with beef, as well as the soy checkoff has had some human dynamics issues over the years as well. If you can build trust, and if people can start trusting that everybody is in the same place and on the same page, you can work miracles. And I know probably everybody on the call, or a lot of them, have read The Speed of Trust. And I kind of model my change models after The Speed of Trust. And that is, business is more efficient with trust. Without trust, things get mired down, things get costly, human productivity falls. With trust, everything moves faster and more efficiently. How do you get trust among people? Well, I think you ask them to be honest and transparent and respectful of each other. And on a harder edge, you hold them accountable for what they've said. If they make a promise and if they say something, then you expect them to do what they say and to tell you what they're going to do. That accountability is sometimes the hard part with building trust, but I think it goes a long, long way to making sure that collaboration between stakeholder groups happens.
It's interesting. So focusing on trust, it reminds me of, and I don't know if we've nerded out about this in the past, so you can remind me if we did. It reminds me of Ronald Burt's work on brokerage and closure. I don't know if we've talked about that a lot, because it sounds like, I think that some people can interpret focusing on trust, focusing on relationships, human dynamics, as feeling like touchy-feely, intangible stuff that doesn't have any sort of economic outcome, or maybe isn't significant or tangible enough to understand. But one of the things I always loved about Ronald Burt's work was, he was like, well, trust is the basis by which, and he was a sociologist, economist, University of Chicago, wrote the book Brokerage and Closure, and talked a great deal about how do social networks interact, and how are new economies, new opportunities shaped. And I swear I'm working around to a question for you, because I think that more than just even helping people to align behind a vision, it seems as though, what you've also intuited and done over the years through focusing on trust is you've been able to see some possibilities that other people maybe otherwise wouldn't see. And I want to talk specifically about this with the this initiative you've launched even over the last year, this Protein First, sort of initiative, right? Where it's you've taken what's normally a game that's about competition over which protein people ought to choose, and instead you're having a different conversation both with the world and with agriculture. So if you want to just tell people more about what is that initiative, and what are you doing, and how did that even come about? What did you see that was out there? How did you read the tea leaves? It'd be great to hear.
Yeah, so I often tell people, in my mind, this isn't really rocket science, right? Human dynamics, you can see when it isn't working correctly. I mean, almost anybody can see it. They can feel the tension, even if you don't want to admit that you walk into a room and you immediately are like, whoa, something's going on in this room, and I just don't know what it is. Since I worked for beef, and now I work for beef, an animal protein, and now I work for a plant protein. When plant proteins started to gain market share, they're not a huge share of market, particularly domestically, but globally, listen, we have need of all kinds of proteins globally. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So when we started talking more about plant proteins in the U.S. as far as the domestic market, and my colleagues at some of the animal proteins got very defensive about plant proteins versus animal proteins. When in reality, what I saw was an opportunity to talk about U.S. produced protein as a category for the world. The world needs protein. We know that protein consumption early in life helps develop infants' brains. We know that growth stunting can be cured with appropriate protein in diets. And we also know that along the continuum of children nutrition, human nutrition, all the way through adulthood, protein, even into the aged population, protein plays a role in health and wellness. Even when you get older, you have bone problems, and protein solves those. So without going into the nutrition area very much, I will tell you that it doesn't matter if a human being lives in Ethiopia or lives in Thailand or lives in the US, we have protein needs, and they're all different. So I started asking folks, why are we fighting about this category? Protein is needed by all humans. It's a category that we can work together in. It's a pre-competitive category, the protein space globally. So how can we all work together as protein producers and talk to the world about the world's needs? We know that as disposable incomes rise in certain countries, the people with those incomes choose different levels of protein and different types of protein. Diet variety is very important to people who are fortunate enough to be able to afford it. So we've started a conversation at the World Food Prize, which we're a sponsor of the World Food Prize, about global protein as a category and understanding the world's needs for proteins country by country and fulfilling those needs both as a mission and as a marketing campaign for U.S. protein. And I think it's starting to gain some traction, and people starting to see, hey, this is a pre-competitive category. We can compete later, but let's talk about how we can work together in this space globally.
Yeah, I think that's the remarkable part is, and again, going back to trust, it seems like you've taken what's the normal game is a very finite one, right? It seems like the default game, and I think it's fair to say in ag, but I think this is across the board. I don't think agriculture necessarily is the only industry that's like this, but the natural game is one of competition. And so what you were able to see though with this broader vision was, well, there's a bigger human need that's out there in the world, and there's this sort of need-driven approach we could take that creates a new basis, right? And you're creating a new basis for trust, even just with the articulation of taking on a bigger challenge. It seems like you're kind of inviting everyone to sit on this side of the table and look at this challenge that we could all take on, as opposed to, let's make sure that over these limited resources we have, let's fight. And that's a very different kind of conversation. What have been your biggest blockers to that kind of conversation and creating that kind of culture around vision? Who have been what has been your biggest blocker for that?
I'm going to tell you that I think when I talk about blockage, I often talk about people who just can't see past a certain thing, right? So when you think about or talk about, here's the size of the pie, often people accept that data. Oh, the pie is only this big, and so we're all competing for pieces of it. With any issue like this, often, almost always, the pie can get bigger, right? So if you think about how to grow the pie for everybody rather than compete about the current pie, then all boundaries go away. So oftentimes when people are resistant to this kind of thinking, it is because traditional business doesn't think about this first. Traditional business says, identify your enemies in the business environment that you're in, and then try to go against them. Try to differentiate yourself from them. Important, don't get me wrong, those things are important in competitive markets. But my mind normally and first goes to, how can we grow this market globally so that there's more space for players within a bigger view? I'll tell you, it's the same thing within the soybean market right now. So the soybean market, we do a lot of animal feed, we do human food, and we do biofuel. Those are the three big things we do with soybeans. Most people don't understand that soybeans can do a lot more, like rubber and asphalt and concrete sealant and metal coatings and shoe soles. And I mean, it's endless, paint and adhesive and carpeting. And so when we think about, oh, the market for soybeans is X, Y, and Z, no, the market is huge, right? We can do anything with a soybean. And so instead of saying, how are we going to compete for this market? We've got to, while competing for this market, we also have to think about how to grow the market and what else we can do. And to that, we have a human need for sustainability, for example. When you think about the greater human need and how you're going to solve those problems, that's when you start really getting the ball rolling in people's minds about how do we solve a bigger problem? How do we solve a human need problem like hunger or sustainability, rather than thinking about how are we going to compete in this small market? And I think a lot of people are capable of that thought if you just try to expand their minds and they have an aha moment.
How do you do that? How do you expand their minds? How you know, what's a, you know, if you were somebody watching this right now and you're like, hell yeah, I really want to do that. I want to change the nature of the conversation we're having about what we do. What kind of things have you been able to do to change the nature of the narrative, the conversation about what the role is that y'all play?
Yeah, so I hate to say start with the why because it sounds so stupid, but that's what you have to do, right? What's important to you, not what's important to me, what's important to you. Listen, consumer, person you're serving, what's important to you is that you eat, right? That your children develop normally. How can I solve that basic human need coming from any constituency? When you flip the lens for people, when I'm able to flip the lens for soybean farmers from, hey, we need to talk about why we're important in agriculture, to, hey, we need to solve problems for someone else. What are those problems? People start thinking about others. Thinking about others builds trust and produces a service mentality that allows expansion of ideas. Does that make sense? I mean, you're thinking about what that other person needs. You're thinking from a servant leader mentality, and that often expands your ability and all of your folks' ability to think in different ways, because we don't think like that. We think competitively, and we think largely in self-interest. So I think that's a really important key to getting folks there.
Yeah, that was, I mean, really the question I had with knowing that you have such a background in understanding how humans work. And it feels fair to say, and I don't have the data that you probably have to support this, but most people wake up and we're a self-centered species, you know, and if at the core of what it is that we're about, you know, when it comes to change, when it comes to our ability to create capacity for change, if the raw materials we're dealing with are human beings that are self-centered by default, how to inspire, I guess, you know, a way to change the sort of playing field, the game. And it sounds like what you're saying is the injection of, let's take a look at what role we play. So when you've been able to do this, and I know that you've been working on this, and you're working on it right now through this initiative with the soybean checkoff, what nuance, what changes inside of either those farmer directors or the people who are in the supporting organizations when they're having conversations about what you do, when they're trying to reshape and make decisions, strategic decisions on what programs to fund, on what things to pursue? How have you seen that shift or change as a result of kind of recalibrating what it is that you're headed toward or what problems you're trying to solve?
So one of the more specific changes that I've seen, especially lately, we had some major funding meetings. We have roughly $70 to $100 million in work budget that goes toward projects every year. And very recently, the farmers voted, 2 weeks ago, the farmers voted on the majority of those funds for the next fiscal year. The question I saw the farmers asking that may be a little different than they've asked in the past, the mindset that's changing is, where are our partners on this? You know, who else is involved in this? Who else cares about the same things that we care about? And who else is willing to put skin in the game, be that human resource or financial resource, to help us with a common mission? That kind of question has not been asked largely in the past, and is very important, because that's when you start thinking about other people and what other people are doing and what they need and how that helps you and how it comes into your mission. I think that's when you start to expand your horizons and think about, you know, it's not just about me and my profitability, it's about us and our profitability. And the two are not selective. You're not selecting against something when you select for yourself. So what you said is, we're self-interested. Absolutely we are, you know. that economic theory is alive and well and true. But just because you're self-interested doesn't mean you have to select against others' interests. There are collaborative partnerships that work. Seeking them out is really critical. And part of seeking them out is meeting people and listening to them and saying, how can we work together? How can we help each other? Do we have common goals? Even when those people may be from backgrounds or missions that seem very foreign to you, there very well may be collaborative experiences that you can have together. Listening is a really critical part of that.
Right, and it does sound like, again, I mean, and not to keep nerding out on the Ronald Burt stuff, but you know, it sounds a lot like you know, reducing the amount of your network that seems like you. So reducing your homophily bias, in other words, the people that probably come from similar backgrounds, have similar mission, being able to make connections and network connections, even if it sounds like what you're saying is we're not even sure what the exact or precise value could be of this relationship connection, but just having that and being able to have the openness of the conversation and listen allows for the capacity, like for change, allows for the capacity for transformation. You know, it increases it.
So true. You know, one of my favorite parts of my job is that I get to go out and meet people a lot. And oftentimes the people I meet, I go to meetings that may or may not have a direct applicability to what I do. And oftentimes those meetings are the best ones because I meet people who are doing so many different things and I sit down and talk to them and I say, here's what I do. What do you do? Oh, there's a link. There's a link. And I get to explore, you know, and I explore it. And if I think it might work and I see how it might work, then I get to take it and say, hey, folks that work for me, I think here's how this might fit together and here's how we might help each other. Is it viable? Does it fit in our strategic plan and our mission? And then I get to go out and grab more people and learn more from other people. And that's one of the best parts of my job. I love that.
So do you think, and I know this, I think I know your answer to this. I'm going to try to predict it anyway. Do you think change is ever done, or is change what's the connection between change and development? Is there a point that you think you'll ever get to where you're like, you know what, we're all good. We don't need any more change?
I hope not, because that would be really boring for me. So, I mean, I told you I love change and I love to make things better. Of course, the danger for me is boredom and lack of change. And so if ever I get to a place where I don't feel like I'm affecting change in an organization anymore, I will leave because that's the best thing for the organization. Organizations need people who drive change, need people who are constantly motivated to make the organization and the mission better. And when that person may get either personally, I don't even know how to say it, they run out of gas, the energy isn't there anymore, you need to make way for somebody who will do that organization better. So if that ever happens with me in jobs, I usually say, hey, I'm done because I just don't feel like I have any more to offer you. Fortunately, it hasn't happened, you know, like every 6 months in my life, but I will say that I do see, I have a constant desire to make change. So if it's ever over, Jeremy, I'd say I got to find something where I can, you know, where I can grab it and make more change. And again, I have resilience to it that a lot of my staff doesn't. My staff likes change too, but a lot of them don't like it nearly as much as I do. So you also have to understand that people's capacity for change has limits, and so you have to understand what the pace is, and respect that pace in other people.
That's what I was going to actually ask you. That's great because, you know, it's like you may be in that constant state of I can embrace change, understand change, I'm motivated by it, I like it when things aren't certain. How do you lead others who maybe don't have that same predisposition? Because it sounds like you come to the party with that, you know, and so how do you contend with or deal with some folks who are like, you know what, everything's just fine. It ain't broke. Like, why are you messing with my stuff? You know? Yeah.
And so I think really what you have to do, and again, I'll cite trust, and that is you have to build a team around you, and you have to build a culture that people can come to you and say, Polly, we're exhausted. You've been, you know, kind of driving us forward like a rented mule, as one of my farmers says, for a long time now, and we need to just make sure that we settle into these changes you've made for a brief period of time before you drive harder. So let us just normalize, stop storming, and let us norm for a little while before you drive forward. And you have to kind of be sensitive to that. And at that point in time is when I usually go into my own strategic planning and visioning within myself. Okay, I can leave you guys alone for a while. And that's when I start writing on my windows. My office has, I haven't been there in a while, but my office has a lot of cool windows, and I take dry markers and I write all kinds of ideas on my windows. And then I'll look at them and erase them, and I can shut myself in my office and entertain myself for hours at a time. And my folks are like, thank God she's shutting her office. She's leaving us alone for a while. So I think the norming is a really important part, especially for people who are basically driven and excited and energized by constant change.
Yeah, I want to go back to something about this protein first thing. So what was the impetus for that? Was the impetus for understanding that kind of an initiative that would call together people into a collaborative sort of effort that they're not used to? Was that kind of transformation conversation something that happened because you were doing these visioning sort of sessions? Was it the emergence or combination of that with anything else? Where did it come from? Where did those ideas come from?
I got kind of angry. I'm gonna admit, I got kind of angry. I get kind of frustrated in agriculture sometimes because we do seem like we're not really understanding that collaboration is the way to go. Right? So when I see us fighting within agriculture and I see all the challenges that are outside of agriculture, then I say, gosh, guys, why would we continue to shoot ourselves in the foot like this? And I get kind of frustrated. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw in the protein space, animal protein, who I worked for a long time, and plant protein, who I worked for a short time, start talking about, well, we're better. I got frustrated. I really did. This happened once before, well, not just once, but several times before in my career, where people who are natural competitors are in a room and are talking about pre-competitive issues. And they, instead of talking about how they can work together, they start talking about who's better or, bumping up on each other. What good does that do for your markets? Not only are you wasting energy you could be using to market your own product in fighting amongst yourselves, but you're really chewing away at each other's market share and each other's ability to market their product and yours. So I think it was born in this case out of frustration at our inability to see the opportunities that we have shared instead of getting in a room and kind of.
Right, but why would hunger come to you? What is that a thing that you've been concerned with, or does it seem so logical and no duh to you that we're growing food, we're trying to feed the world, folks?
Dude, we're in the food business. I mean, what? So my mom was a minister growing up, and world hunger was one of her things. So we were on world hunger marches. We did a lot with hunger. But one of the reasons I got into the food industry is because food culturally is a fascinating topic, right? Hunger is not only a socioeconomic, but a political topic. Food is a national security, as we're realizing now, a national security topic. So food is complicated and interesting. But one of the best parts about it as a sociologist is think of all the occasions that food brings cultures together. I mean, cultures, families, small units, large units of society come together around food. So when you think about agriculture, you naturally think about hunger. That's why we do what we do, right? So if we're not constantly thinking about feeding people, then we probably should be, because that's the reason we're in food. Now it's not a dirty word to make a profit, for heaven's sake. That's how sustainability goes. I mean, profit is one of the three legs of sustainability, and we should be profitable to be sustainable. But that larger mission, that larger human need, is where I think our work must always be rooted, and no pun intended or pun intended. So food just hunger comes really naturally to me as a place that agriculture serves society. So I guess when you say, was it a no-brainer, it's kind of a no-brainer. We're in agriculture.
Right.
What do we do?
Well, and you certainly had a good model, growing up for contending with like a bigger issue, a human need sort of issue. But I think it's fair to say that the concept people have of agriculture
Mm.
isn't necessarily one that seems dynamic, maybe in the way that you see it. So what is it that drew you to ag? I mean, most people, I think, have a concept that agriculture is old, and it's outside of sure, there's cool tech and some farm equipment, but what's dynamic about agriculture? What could be interesting or changeworthy about agriculture?
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in ag, as I've just noted, and I will say that when I got introduced to ag in late high school, college, the thing that drew me to it was, when I talk about being rooted, was the agricultural families oftentimes are generations and generations on the farm. They have roots. They have familial roots. I moved around a lot as a kid. I didn't have a lot of those roots, and that concept of cultural roots and communities that have been there for a long time and families that have been there for a long time fascinated me. The fact that those families grow food and have a connection to food. So rooted families, stewards of land for 4 or 5 generations in many cases, growing something that is important to political power, to cultural adhesion, to survivability, those kinds of things. All of those come together. So when people say agriculture is old, or oh, one time not too long ago I read in the media article, agriculture hasn't changed in 100 years. I think, wow, we have some serious misconceptions about agriculture out there. Agriculture looks nothing like it did 100 years ago. And every change is really cool. It's complicated. It has ripples economically, the changes do. As we're seeing now, I think society understands food better now, and the changes that we've made and the importance of food to national security and to our own comfort level when crisis hits, than perhaps general society has ever. And so when people say ag is boring, I think, oh my gosh, you need to know more about ag, because it's fascinating. Ag is fascinating, and the impacts and the ripple effects are fascinating globally.
I have so many questions about this. So when I think that one could be tempted because and the folks who are watching may not be as familiar with soybeans, why they're used, or what their many uses are. But a good amount of them anyway are not, certainly not in the U.S. market, a direct consumer sort of protein in the same way that, let's say, milk, beef, some of these other agricultural products we're much more familiar with from a U.S. market perspective. So a temptation could be, well, we're not going to even attempt to do any kind of any sort of communication or connection to the consumer, the U.S. consumer, and the people who are interested in food, because that's not who we're feeding directly. That's not our direct consumer. So we're going to focus on the people that we sell to the most, which I think from a logic perspective makes sense.
Sure.
But what I'm hearing you say is that you've at least worked to leverage and some of those collaborative sort of efforts to change the nature of what are we talking about when we're talking about food, when we're talking about agriculture.
I think that, again, there's a larger mission here. So soybeans, you grow them, you pick them, you harvest them, you take them to the big silo processing plant, and the processing plant separates into the meal portion, or the crunchy portion, or the oil portion, extracts the oil, and we sell those 2 products. Meal and oil go into a lot of things. Meal primarily into human and animal feed. Oil goes into everything. I mean, lots and lots and lots of things. So I think one of the things we're working on at USB right now is making sure the supply chain, and that means from farmers to consumers. I always tell folks, raw material comes into the chain one place, that's farmers, and money comes into the chain one place, that's consumers. So if you're going to focus on any areas of our supply chain, those are the 2 you better focus on, because you've only got one money input, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you ignore the ultimate people who are using your product, be that in asphalt or be that in a muffin where oil might be, then you're not really understanding what the needs of society are that you need to fill, right? You can just keep generating your own work day after day and watching it go off into the truck, and saying, well, my next day is planting. Or you can say, what human need am I serving? What does the other end of the chain need? And that is the only way that you're going to keep the change that is really relevant to your market, and therefore serves the need that you're trying to serve. So yes, drawing the chain closer together, giving consumers more opportunity to talk to the companies, and those companies more opportunity to talk to farmers and say, here's what we really need from you, and here's what we really, really value. That's one of the things we're really trying to do at USB, is kind of tightening that communication between one end and the other end of the supply chain.
Well, that's interesting, because that's what I was going to ask. Do you think, more broadly, not just the checkoff, but do you think agriculture, I guess maybe here's the question. What do you think agriculture's posture is toward change? And do you think that agriculture is in a place that it's ready to accept change or take change on in a way that maybe it hadn't been, right? So just in your estimation, between the years that you've been, in the industry.
Yeah, I think agriculture's attitude toward change is changing. I really do. I think that there were a lot of ag producers, say, even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I started working in ag, that basically thought, I know how to do this, and you need to get out of my way, consumer, right? I've been doing this for 3 generations, and you don't know what I do, and you don't understand what I do. Therefore, you have no right to input into what I do. I see an enormous sea change in that kind of attitude in agriculture since that time. And I think a lot more farmers realize now that the production of food is a right that is given to farmers by society. Society gives social license to certain people to produce necessary for life elements, food being one of them. And so I think farmers more than ever realize that the engagement of consumers in the agricultural chain, that consumers and eaters, as I like to call them, are folks that are really involved in agriculture. They're part of the ag chain, and listening to them and engaging them is more important than ever. So I see a huge change in agriculture's attitude toward inclusion of consumers and eaters within the agricultural chain and the agricultural conversation. And I think that's a wonderful change, and one that we work pretty much every day to drive forward.
That's really interesting, because as someone who did grow up at least near ag, probably in a similar setting to you, serialized rural America experience, most of the communications culture was adversarial, right? I think, to say it in the least. But you're saying you're seeing the signals of more sort of collaborative conversations, more people inviting other points of view, diverse points of view, into how they would go about building their plan, right? How would we go about being relevant for this particular human need?
Yes, and the fact that we fulfill a human need at all,
right?
And that yeah, we're important, but we're not so important that we can eliminate all other voices from the conversation about how that food is produced. I think is an enormous change from what I used to hear out of agriculture, and I'm so grateful for that change. It's a change in the right direction. I mean, people have, I have been known to say, people have a right to tell you what they want to put in their body. You don't have a right to tell them what they should put in their body. I mean, we want data, we want science, right? We absolutely want those things, but people will eat what they feel comfortable eating. Science sometimes completely aside. So if you're a farmer who says, I'm going to tell you what you'll eat, and I'm going to tell you how you'll cook it, and I'm going to tell you how I give it to you, it's not going to last very long, because people have the right to say, I'm going to put this in my body, or I'm not going to put this in my body.
Yeah, it's a very intimate thing.
Absolutely. Right? Food is, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, like, if you become too separate from that, or you close off, that is actually the impact that food is having, then you decontextualize what it is you're producing, right? It's almost like,
I mean, literally, you don't even have to eat food to make it a cultural experience. Think about Thanksgiving.
Right.
I mean, you put the food on the table and the feeling about the food is already binding the group together before you even eat it. And so when you have the eating experience after that emotional experience of the gathering, that eating experience should also is also a very emotional, intimate kind of experience. And the truth is, after you eat, you're either happy and feel great, or you overeat and you're in a tryptophan coma, for some time. But
either way, a good outcome, right?
Either way is a good outcome, especially if you really like to watch football. Hopefully we'll have football. But it's just intimate is a great word, because food is such an intimate experience, and everybody has the right to engage in it in that experience.
We had a good question that came through the Q&A, and it related to one of the areas that you covered when you've been able to recast the role of your organization or what you hope to play, or the size of the problem you're taking on. And let's say you're successful in doing that, and your vision has merit, and people are talking about it. At that point, have you ever run into a situation in which it was still derailed? And in terms of, can change still be derailed? And if so, what derails change?
Well, absolutely, because people are people, right? And not predictable. You don't just set somebody on a course and then put on autopilot. I mean, people's emotions can derail change constantly. So the things that can, I think the main thing that derails change is fear and betrayal. So when I say betrayal, I mean, I believe strongly that trust is the foundation of these kinds of change initiatives. If you say you're going to do something and you betray your word, that can set a change initiative back profoundly. So if you have a group of people that don't mean what they say, and just say they're going to do something and then don't intend to, or that ask for engagement and commitment from a group and don't mean to use that commitment, or abuse power, or lie habitually, you can derail change in a heartbeat. And I won't make any more comments on the state of the country as that goes. I will say that any good change can be derailed by any of those kind of bad behaviors or bad actors. Hopefully the change is strong enough and the masses are strong enough to overcome one or two or three of those voices. But it can happen. It can happen. And often, and I know betrayal is, we talked about intimacy. Betrayal is an intimate word, but so is trust. And breaking trust is the fastest way to derail substantive change, I think. And part of that is accountability. Listen, people are going to make mistakes. People are going to say things and not be able to keep their promises. In those cases, transparency and honesty are probably the best tools you have. Listen, I said I was going to do this, and I'm not going to be able to do that. And the reason is because A, B, and C. I'm not trying to make an excuse, but I'm trying to help you understand why my accountability and why my word is now being broken. People are very forgiving of that.
I was about to ask this because I think it is important to say, it's one thing to say we ought to be held accountable. A natural thing that people then ask is things like, well, then what? So let's say somebody does make a mistake. Let's say somebody does have an error in judgment. Let's say someone made a commitment, a leader made a commitment, or a manager made a commitment, didn't keep it. It sounds like what you're saying is there's already a natural built-in consequence for that. I mean, so are you, because a lot of times it sounds like what naturally emerges is, how ought we punish someone who doesn't, so what's the difference between accountability and I guess, lack of better term, punishment?
Yeah, well, discipline never really, I prefer accountability to discipline in change management and in leadership. Listen, you can say, what happened here? I trusted you and I held you accountable. Why did this go off the rails? Instead of saying, you did something bad and now you're going to be, punished for it. That doesn't build trust, and actually it doesn't really work. I mean, again, I'll talk about raising children. A lot of times, if you don't explain to the child why they're in trouble and you just spank them, they go off and say, I don't really understand what just happened, but it hurt. So now I'm never going to try anything that even resembles that again because I don't want to get hurt. Whereas if you explain it to them and say, you know, you're being punished because of this, this, and this, then they say, oh, I understand and I won't do it that way again. So it's human dynamics, right? It's trust. Yeah.
What's your, we only have a couple of minutes left, but so what's next for you? You know, I mean, even, I know that there's a lot of goals you have with the checkoff, obviously, but it seems like there's this trajectory that Polly's on, you know, like you've sort of built for yourself these wider and wider sort of complexities of change that you're willing to take on. And now the complexity level of the change you're taking on is hunger, of course, which
it's pretty big.
It's a pretty big one. So, you know, what excites you? What's next for you? What's on your horizon? What's fascinating you? Where are you headed?
Well, I'll tell you, I have quite a lot of interest in soybeans yet, believe it or not. I really believe that all the things that soybeans can do in society really is a big deal. Like if we can replace 30% of the asphalt that uses petroleum with a renewable soybean product, and the environmental impact of that on a big scale is hugely exciting to me. So, you know, the way that we can impact the world through the use of a renewable bean is just super cool. So I'm here for a while. And then, you know, at some point in time, maybe I'm just going to go over and teach full time because I love teaching and I think it offers a lot of capacity for change in teaching. So I don't know. I've always kind of gone through life and said, I don't have a plan that looks like X, Y, and Z in year X, Y, and Z. Just always keep my eyes open, look around and say, what looks fun? You know, what looks fun next?
So the what looks fun approach led to the CEO title for you. That's
yeah.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Nice work on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I say it's, you know, it's mostly luck, being in the right place at the right time, but only doing things that really engage you and that you find fun and that you really can get a lot of passion about. And that's what I've always done.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for the time with us today. I want to let folks know that you can go to, it's at United Soy on Twitter, and also at Polly Pencil Plow, correct?
That's Twitter.
That's Twitter. You can also go to just, you know, unitedsoybean.org, and you can learn more about USB and the checkoff, and send Polly a message through there as well.
Absolutely. Polly Pencil Plow. It's from President Eisenhower.
Is it really?
Yeah, you can.
Now I feel terrible for not knowing.
No, don't be.
What is it?
You can. Farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from a field.
Well done. Well done.
Yeah.
Well, follow Polly, follow up with her. Thank you to everyone for attending. You'll get a full video of this. So if you feel like you missed something, or if you want to go back and watch anything, share it with your network, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks a lot, Polly. Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.